Thank you for joining us again, and welcome to Real Talk Office Hours for Wednesday. Whoops. Welcome to Real Talk Office Hours for Friday, May 22nd, 2020. Hosted today by myself, Corey Hart, and we have George Katsanos and special guest from Islamabad, Arzish. And then we're brought to you by Startup Grind, the world's largest startup community. With 600 plus chapters in over 125 countries, Startup Grind operates with a mission to educate, inspire, and connect. And we're driven by three core values. That's make friends, not contacts, help others before you help yourself, and give before you take. The pandemic has been and will continue to be the great global leveler. As entrepreneurs, we do our very best for our businesses, teams, and families, and we should be informed, rational, analytical, and rigorous in our thinking. We should also learn to control our biases as they emerge in various circumstances. We invite you to join us live every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as we track the intersection of these biases, facts, and action through our review of global financial markets, alongside check-ins and real talk with Startup Grind chapter directors, entrepreneurs, and ecosystem stakeholders from around the world. No one has a crystal ball, but if we keep our eyes and ears open and pay attention, we may be able to see around the bend and with some luck, spot the silver linings that are around every cloud. If you miss the live events, you can view the recordings at startupgrind.com/grand-rapids, where you can also download the reading notes from the show, as well as find us at YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, anywhere else that you find your favorite podcasts. And before I introduce you to my partner in crime, George, a bit of housekeeping. Comments made and views expressed by all participants in this podcast are not intended to invite or incite individuals, entrepreneurs, or investors to buy or sell financial assets, real assets, commodities, futures, and/or options. The purpose of this podcast is to educate and to inform, not to trade or to invest. If you feel compelled to trade and/or invest, please call your broker. Remember, however, risk is everywhere, even when you think that you are not taking a risk. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce to everyone George Katsanos to get us started with a catch-up of what the global markets are thinking today.
Thank you, Corey, and good afternoon and good evening to all our listeners. May I please have the share screen?
Yes, sorry about that. There
capability
you go.
To
Boom.
Thank you. Okay. Clearly, the events in Asia, particularly in Hong Kong, are rattling financial markets. We have talked about this in the past, that the pandemic created diverging responses within the world community in terms of its response, both at the political level, the economic level, and the social level. This dislocation has created fissures and fractures. And some of these result in either policy response that is inadequate or political decision-making that creates hazards. The reason we look at the markets every day of the week is because we as entrepreneurs and we as investors have to understand the risk and the reward that is possible. We're looking at currencies, interest rates, commodities, and equities around the world, and we try to understand what signals the markets are giving us. We know, for instance, when we start with currencies, which you see here in front of you, we see that the major currencies have tended to appreciate in value against emerging market currencies or currencies of weaker economies. The dollar as the reserve currency has remained very attractive, and we see it again at 1.08, 1.09 against the euro. We've seen that against most currencies, it has slightly appreciated since Wednesday. And we know that currencies tend to be more sensitive to global events. We are aware that the fixed income market is where the truth lies. In other words, investors who tend to be risk averse prefer investments in government bonds, where they are more likely to receive their principal back at the end of the investment period. For comparison reasons, throughout our Real Talk events, we focus on the yield, the interest rate that governments are willing to pay when investors invest in 10-year bonds issued either by the central bank or by the Treasury departments or the ministries of finance. For instance, we're looking at Asia. When we look at Asia, we see Japan hovering at around 0%. So if you're an investor in 10-year Japanese bonds, you're likely to receive 0% interest. That shows how risk averse the Japanese investors are in yen-denominated bonds. Australia, little change at 0.86 for 10 years. New Zealand, 0.6. Hong Kong, 0.5. What is surprising to see here is that although the 10-year yield in Hong Kong dollars has remained relatively stable, the pressures must be mounting. So bear this in mind when we look around the world, that fear is not gone. Investors, entrepreneurs understand the risk more than anybody else. All of us are in the front line, whether because of our jobs or because of our investments or because of the advice we give to companies around us. Look at Europe. The 10-year bonds in Europe are going literally nowhere. And the reason for this is that Europe is stumbling from one decision to another. At the beginning of this week, we saw efforts anchored by Angela Merkel to introduce a pan-European bond. And the debate is raging. It is absolutely of concern to us that if Europe does not pursue a consistent macroeconomic policy covering both the North and the South, the euro will be under pressure. Look at North America. The US 10-year bond is stuck between 0.6 and 0.7%. What is surprising in some contrarian thinking is that this yield has not gone down to 0.2% with all this buying that the Federal Reserve has been doing. Clearly, the market are hesitant. The market is concerned to some extent. Canada stuck at around 0.5%. So if you're investing in Canadian 10-year bonds, you'll be getting 0.5% from now to maturity in 2030. Mexico has been going all around between 5.75 and 6.25% for the last month and a half. Today, the 10-year bond has a yield of 6.16%. Clearly, there are themes that the investor community, that global entrepreneurs, not only those here in the US, but everywhere around the globe, are paying attention to. And we can see more than anything else in commodities. The commodity market, let's start with energy first of all. Oil has gone down from a high of 35 recently to 32, $33 a barrel. And the reason is Chinese growth. We saw that the Chinese National People's Congress is taking place in Beijing 3 months later because of the pandemic. For the first time in recent history, China abandoned its practice of setting a target for economic growth this year. The Chinese Premier Li Keqiang said that the government refrained from doing so because of domestic conditions and because foreign markets were so uncertain. So West Texas Intermediate is down, Brent is also down, but look at the gold, 1734, from a high of 1750 on Wednesday. Today, gold is trading $15 lower, around 1734.35. Corn, it's down at $316 per bushel. Wheat, down. Live cattle, down. This is because essentially what's happening in China. If we have issues with Chinese demand and if we have issues with Chinese growth, expect agricultural commodities to be lower as we go into the important season of selling them. Let's come to equities. The equities market, here is the live market condition. The red that you see in front of you is Asia. Asia closed for the weekend and will reopen on Monday. But across the board, we have lower equity prices. It's not surprising. Hong Kong has been an anchor of economic stability, even in the worst circumstances, from the Asian crisis in the mid-90s all the way to today. Local governments throughout Asia are concerned, and entrepreneurs and investors more so. Europe, mixed picture, depending on where you stand. Amsterdam slightly up, Spain just about breaking even compared to yesterday, France a bit down, and as we see, Germany is going to close at around flat, nothing major. Here in the US, we are down 0.5% in the S&P 500 and Dow, whereas Nasdaq is just above breaking point, breaking even. Volatility has come down to 29, which is not low by historical standards, but definitely not high by what we've seen before. There is 2 points I would like to mention before I pass on to Corey and our guest speaker. The first is that I would like to remind you what Jay Powell, the governor of the Federal Reserve, said on Sunday evening in CBS 60 Minutes. For the economy to fully recover, people will have to be fully confident. Very few of our entrepreneurs are fully confident because of the diversity of uncertainty. As we mentioned before, both sides of the balance sheet, both assets and liabilities, are uncertain at this moment. So you should be aware of this fact when you're making decisions about risk-reward positions and allocations. The second point, and we mentioned that at the beginning of our series, herd immunity is emerging as a potential policy response. Allow us to remain skeptical. And the reason for that is that herd immunity means that many people get the virus and develop antibodies, that there aren't many people left to infect at the end of the day. Well, it is unclear that infection confers immunity. This medical fact should color people's decisions and caution. I would like to express our condolences to the families in Pakistan who have lost their beloved ones in the accident in Karachi. And with this, Corey, back to you.
Thank you very much, George. Before we move on to speaking with our guest, you touched on a little bit in the beginning of the update there. But why is it important for entrepreneurs around the globe and their micro level circumstances on the ground to pay attention to the global, like, macroeconomic pictures?
Economic policy has tended to be relatively benign since the crisis of 2008, 2009. And what I mean by that is that all central banks interfered with the markets themselves. They tried to provide a support. This created the famous Fed put in financial jargon. What that meant is that you can be as greedy as you want, and if things go badly, well, the Federal Reserve will come and bail you out. We saw that to some extent with the TARP program, 2008, 2009, and we're seeing it again in unprecedented degrees with the Federal Reserve intervention in the markets. This intervention has created ample liquidity. And we're back to ZIRP, zero interest rate policies. What this zero interest rate policy means is that investors are looking for yield, are looking for a return on their capital. So the rallies that we've seen in the equity markets is a combination of low interest rates, historically very low interest rates, low inflation expectations, and tremendous liquidity. This condition cannot go on forever. I repeat, this is highly unusual. And in this regard, we're looking at all four asset classes: currencies, bonds, commodities, and equities, to understand what are the opportunities and potential risks. Because these characteristics are evident in every economy. And we as private equity investors, as advisors to small companies, we need to be cognizant of the fact that there are pressures out there, economic and medical, of course, resulting in social dislocation.
Thank you. Yeah, and so it's with that that we, we really felt a powerful opportunity to engage our global startup grind directors in a conversation about what's going on globally, because that does inform what happens on the other side of the world. Today is our second guest in this series. 2 days ago, we talked with Declan from Edinburgh, and that was a really amazing conversation. Definitely check that out. But today, I'd love to introduce everyone to Arzish Azam. He's from Islamabad, chapter director there. And you told me that you were one of the first, or the first, chapter director in Pakistan. Is that correct?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting and the fantastic update from George. I personally learned a lot. And yes, I can say that over the past 3 years, we have enabled, and personally myself from Islamabad, we now have more than 12 chapters across the country, and we have hosted also the Startup Grind Pakistan conference, which we did last year in November.
And that's an incredible story right there. And then in addition to that, you bring a large delegation from the country to our global conference every year in February. Is that correct?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we have been doing this for the past 3 years.
And would you be able to give a couple highlights from this last February?
Absolutely. So this year was our third year to Silicon Valley. And we had a delegation of 50 change makers, as we call them. A lot of entrepreneurs, technology experts, some people from the government who are working in the digital economy sector. And other than attending Startup Grind, we also hosted a conference off around, kind of a small conference in Startup Grind. But in this event, we had more than 300 people from the Pakistani diaspora, investors, entrepreneurs, people who are looking to give back or learn more about our ecosystem.
Yeah, I saw that some of that being advertised when I was there, and I felt bad that I wasn't able to attend. And I didn't have an opportunity to meet you either, but I look forward to in the coming years being able to, I don't know, fist bump or elbow bump or whatever we do in the next years. Either way, so that's a real powerful testament to the size and influence of the ecosystem there in Pakistan. Could you just catch us up a little bit on some of that energy? Because with the support of the Ministry of Information and Technology, it seems like there's a lot of energy there.
Oh, absolutely. So I'll just give you a brief overview of Pakistan in the IT industry. So Pakistan happens to be the sixth largest country in the world in terms of population, right? And the third largest in terms of English language speakers, right? So that's a surprising factor for a lot of people. Thanks to colonization, we have people speaking very, very good English, and that helps when a lot of our talent goes out in the world to study and then ends up creating and selling companies for billions of dollars, right? But at the same time, a lot of our talent inside Pakistan has worked as team members, as engineers, as the builders of these unicorns and startups. And still, I can name unicorns like Kareem and Affinity and a bunch of others who have been built by Pakistani talent. We just had our first homegrown unicorn, which is called Zameen or EPMG. They run some of the largest property portals in the region, right? So not just Pakistan, a bunch of them in the MENA region, in Europe and a lot of countries. And this kind of huge talent pool has given us a rank of being the third in terms of freelancing economy, right? So we have a lot of people sitting here, working in the US market, working in the European market. So in terms of the IT industry, we have some really, powerful talent, and they have created not just startups inside Pakistan, but also outside Pakistan as well.
Yeah. And now you also have a robust incubator accelerator system there, right? Not just supported by the government, but private industry as well. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. The Ministry of IT over the years has created a lot of programs. One of them is called the National Incubation Center, which are 5 incubators in the 5 capitals of the country, very massive spaces. And then a lot of private initiatives, like one of them I run, have been here, have been helping build the ecosystem.
And then you brought up some interesting stats, in the beginning of the introduction there, as far as, the 6th largest country as far as population, the large amount of English speakers. And then that is in contrast to, say, some of the infrastructure issues that the country might have, and then that 1% or so are actually paying income taxes. So are those challenges that affect the outlook for investors coming in and looking for startups, or is that and that kind of ties into my next question, is also maybe you could tie that into maybe to telling us about this initiative you told me that you're doing as far as upskilling the devs and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, Pakistan as a country has been a very, a kind of a cash economy, right? So a lot of businesses, a lot of people, they operate on cash. Still, the biggest chunk of the economy is undocumented, right? And the government has over the years been trying different ways to document them. Sometimes these ways actually hurt the business rather than supporting them. But we're trying to get there, right? And over the years, we have been, if I can, my experience is more than the IT industries, we have seen some really good investors come in the last 3 to 5 years, right? So recently, Zameen raised funding and became a unicorn. Before this, there was a startup called Airlift. There is around $12 million from a Silicon Valley venture. There's a bunch of other startups who have raised capital. And I think this kind of cash-based economy has also provided a lot of opportunities for startups who are trying to address the same issue as the government, right? Which is to digitalize the economy, document this economy, and kind of increase the tax base as well.
Right. So you have that, it's kind of like 2 economies going there.
So,
Yeah. So I do want to talk about, or have you enlightened us on what it is that you're doing outside of Startup Grind, this
oh
really
yeah,
great initiative for the upskilling.
absolutely, absolutely. So my accelerator is Art Labs. We've worked over the past 3 years in kind of building the startup ecosystem. And one of the challenges that we observed is that a lot of the tech talent, a lot of these amazing developers that are working inside Pakistan, they're not really aware of all these opportunities at Silicon Valley companies or US-based startups, right? Especially they're not used to this era of working remote, right? Which all they have to do now, right? But before this, we started this around January, February, and we have been kind of upskilling these developers. The government has also invested a lot of resources into upskilling these developers. And our goal has been to connect them and match them with startups in remote working, full-time remote working positions.
That's really great. And we talked a little bit about the Ministry of Information and Technology earlier, and how involved they are in just the ecosystem in general. Are they active partners in your initiative?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the National Freelancer Training Program, which was recently launched by the Ministry of IT, which is run by the Punjab IT Board, we believe they're doing a fantastic job, kind of doing the early stages of the developer training, right? And then organizations like us come into kind of connecting this pool of somewhat trained talent to opportunities, mostly outside Pakistan, but also sometimes inside Pakistan, right? And we're also actively exploring partnerships with companies like Salesforce and AWS and IBM to run their certification programs with this program and other programs for Pakistani developers, right? So just to give numbers, so this program, I believe they have around 40 physical training centers across the country where they're hoping to train thousands and thousands of developers. They have been doing this for the past 3 to 5 years, and now they're just expanding the program. And over the years, this will really benefit the economy.
That's pretty incredible. That's a lot of work. Well, I really appreciate the introduction to what you're doing, and then I guess catching everyone else up on the ecosystem in general. But now I think what we really want to also learn about is in your own personal ecosystem there, your sort of your flock, so to speak. Within regards to the people involved, can you think of any individual entrepreneurs or investors in your community that you can maybe highlight as far as like what they're thinking or maybe what they're doing at present?
Absolutely, absolutely. So all of them happen to be friends. I've been in this ecosystem for a very long time, and not a very long. I think 3.5 years. But I've seen a lot of amazing things and are part of a lot of these initiatives trying to connect the ecosystem, right? And it is really inspiring to see that even in these times, many of these entrepreneurs and investors are doing some fantastic work, right? So just to give a shout out to one of these investors, Atif Awan. He was a VP at LinkedIn in the US. He, after retiring, he kind of set up a VC fund targeted towards Pakistani startup. He was part of the round that invested $12 million in one of these startups. So they are actively looking to invest in startups right now, even in these times, right? And in terms of entrepreneurs, a lot of our companies that were in the logistics space, right? So one of these, happens to be Kareem, because in the ride sharing space, they laid off 30% of their employees globally. But many entrepreneurs who are working in the digitalization or more like digital products, they are seeing more response, better response. One of them happens to be Convo, which is like a Slack competitor built by Pakistanis. I believe it was acquired by Adobe, but they are doing some amazing work even in these times. All of their team is operating remotely, working on full speed. There are a lot of kind of very innovative solutions that some of the entrepreneurs started. Like one of my friends, he realized that kind of self-grooming is a big issue, especially when you're quarantined at home. So he started something called barber on wheels, right? So where a barber kind of dresses up in this protective suit and goes to someone's house to groom their hair and something. I haven't used this service because I live in the other city, as you can see. But these are some really innovative things that these entrepreneurs are doing.
That's awesome. George, do you have any related questions?
Yes, one of the reasons we look at financial markets is for valuation purposes. As you have read probably, the S&P 500 in the US has a price to earnings ratio of about 22, 23 times. This is historically very high. We've seen that in recessions, the P of the S&P 500 tends to go around 12, 13. That's when investors get on board and we have the recovery. But we're far from that. What are the valuation trends that you've noticed over the last couple of years? Because from what we have seen in the screen, the Karachi 100 index has really rocketed. I mean, we've seen that the opening up of the economy over the last 10 years has led to tremendous innovation, growth. A lot of wealth has been created in the equities market. And we're seeing that after this, so to speak, pandemic effect, slowly the index is recovering. The valuations, however, remain high for public market standards. What is your perspective?
Sure. So I think first of all, I'm not a big expert in the finance market, but I'll just give my 2 cents on this. So as as the U.S. market or many major markets have been affected heavily, might be the case because of the dependence on mortgages or loans, right? But as compared to that, Pakistan has always been a cash-rich economy, as we said before. So even all these like big businesses, they have a lot of cash and a lot of assets, right? So in our observation, the past 2 months of closing down has not affected the Pakistani market in as much as it has affected other markets, which rely a lot on mortgages, right? Where people, if you don't get a week's salary, you have to pay your mortgage and everything. Like it sets off a chain reaction, right? But here we have not seen that. And as you can see, the country opened up, I think last week, businesses are opening up, a lot of things are opening up. We have a relatively low death rate, which is surprising. So the market is recovering as well, right? I think we have been a little lucky here.
Are transactions taking place in the startup grind world? In other words, are investors investing in companies? Are they pulling out of the investments? Are they more conservative? What is the trend?
So they're actively looking for investment. Like, most of these investors, a lot of them were on this webinar like last week, and I was listening to them as well. In a startup called Swivel, which operates in Egypt and Pakistan and a couple other markets. Its team it's started by ex-Kareemers, which is this Pakistani unicorn in the MENA region. They raised a round during this time. Zameen, which I talked about, which just became the first homegrown Pakistani unicorn. They started from Pakistan. One of their biggest markets is Pakistan. They just raised a round of, I believe, around $50 million, which gave them a valuation of $1 billion plus, right? They acquired a very big business in the region called OLX. And now, they have this huge business in around 16 countries, which operates from Pakistan. And all of this happened during the quarantine and during this COVID era. So I think, from the investment perspective, a lot of good news has come in.
That's awesome. So we have someone else on this call here. We have Shay. He happens to be the co-director for Startup Grind Lansing. He's mentioned that he has a quick comment or question. Shay, did you want to jump in? Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks, Corey. George, Corey, thanks for putting this together. Arzish, good to see you here, man. It's been a while that I've been trying to hear all the good things that you'll be doing in Pakistan. Just a quick background on mine. I'm from Pakistan too. I moved to USA when I was a teenager, so I still have my family living in Pakistan, and I still call Pakistan as a home, away from home. And one thing that I have always noticed is that the younger generation of Pakistan, especially the ones after 80s and 90s, have actually set a really good tone as to how the country will look like in the near future. And I believe what the work that Arzish is doing is a reflection of what my parents or my grandparents' generation always wanted to see. So a couple of things that I noticed that George mentioned in the index, and he also suggested that there is a huge spike in the trend that may reflect wealth creation. Part of the reason why I think, and I could be wrong, is that since 90s, the country has moved towards privatization. That has helped a little bit. It also has helped individuals who may not be from a typical business family or entrepreneurial family realize that they may have a space in the society to use their ideas and turn them into businesses, because that's something that we really, really need in that part of the world, because the talent is always there, skills are there. My father, for example, he was for 30 years, he worked in Karachi as a software engineer, computer engineer in a government-run insurance company called State Life. Arzish may know about.
Yeah.
He always thought that he could not use his skills because he always wanted to do something on his own. He always wanted to build products, but he couldn't. And then he could not fulfill his skills. He could not utilize his skills and do things that he wanted to do. But I think this generation and the things that we have been seeing in the country since 2000s, I think it is taking us to that direction. That is, if we allow people in Pakistan use their skills and have a platform that Arzish is providing for a number of years and turn their skills into ideas and probably ideas into businesses, that will create a ripple effect in the entire community, I think. that will also create more wealth, as George mentioned. As of right now, what we have noticed, and my background is public policy, is that every time we see spikes in wealth creation, it's only limited to a certain number of families. What really could help Pakistan is that if that spike is a representation of people, not just from the wealthy backgrounds, but also a typical middle class family like my own, who may have a space and then can create fortunes. For that, as Arzish mentioned, if we can improve upon regulations, public policy, and cut some red tape, that will help. But I think this is a great topic. What Arzish has been doing, I think he gave the nudge to the Pakistan startup community, and I think he might go down as someone who is the pioneer behind privatization.
Thank you so much for your kind words.
Maybe you could talk a little bit about what that last point was, as far as reducing some of that friction to starting businesses or to even having access, because I read that there is some movement there within the government.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as she mentioned that Pakistan as a country has been for a very long time, I would say even controlled by some very large business groups, which is fine, which happens in a lot of economies in the early stages, right? But internet has played a very big role, awareness, social media, all of this to give opportunity to people who may not have a privileged background to start something, to go down the route of entrepreneurship and starting a company, starting a startup, starting small businesses, right? And you can see a lot of self-made businesses and startups coming up in the economy, right? One of the things that myself and a lot of other organizations are trying to do is create more opportunities using the digital resources available, right? So training developers, training startups, running virtual programs, upskilling people, right? Because so we have more than 220 million people, and not everyone can start a startup, but a lot of them can become developers and designers and engineers and work in the digital economy, right? And my personal goal has been and still is to empower as many people as we can to become part of the global digital economy, because there they can do better for themselves. They can be competitive to the whole world, provide services to some of the top companies or become part of these top companies, and the possibilities are literally and limitless, right? And especially this this recent boom and necessity of working from home has also highlighted that working from home is absolutely fine, right? So companies like Twitter saying that you can just keep working from home, that is proof that humans, especially if only we need to work on our laptop, can work from our home wherever we are. And I think hopefully in the coming years we may be able to make a dent.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a good point earlier with that blended model of as we emerge from this, we can do a little bit of both. It's not it's not one or the other exclusively. We're coming up on a bit of a time thing. We do move into being really curious about what the risks and rewards you have there on the ground. Because of some very specific pressures related to just your geography and the density and whatever. What are you seeing there for your entrepreneurs and your community with the risks and rewards?
Absolutely. So I think with so we have a very large what you would call a middle class, right? So they have some level of disposable income. They're getting jobs. So it's a very very lucrative retail market, right? So many large brands have been built. A lot of startups were riding on this wave, right? Some of these logistics companies, but the opportunities which have emerged due to this are mostly in the digitalization era, right? So number one, we have this huge cash economy, right? But what that also means is that a lot of businesses, a lot of big and small businesses haven't been digitalized properly, right? The banking system needs a lot of updating. So in Pakistan, we still go to the bank to get a check or deposit a check or or make a cash deposit, right? There's a teller who's sitting there. So for those of you in the US, this might be a new thing. You just go to the ATM and put in the cash, right? But these things have created opportunities for all these startups who had been working in the digitalization space to do more business, right? They have given the nudge to all these businesses to kind of implement solutions. We've seen e-commerce grow by about 20-30%. A lot of e-commerce businesses are growing like crazy, right? But also, companies like Convo, which is Pakistani, which is like a Slack competitor, they have seen a lot of growth in the Pakistani market. Previously, the clients had been like Nike in the US and a bunch of other brands, but now all these big corporations in Pakistan, they are looking at these solutions, right? So I think these are the hidden opportunities due to this new way of life.
That's interesting that they would have a huge influx in business locally. Is that like a deglobalization digitally? That's kind of interesting.
Yep.
And George, any questions on this topic of risks and rewards?
Well, I think that both Shay and Arzish hit the nail on the head. If I may remind them of a quote by Steve Jobs, who said that to turn really interesting ideas and fledgling technologies into a company that can continue to innovate for years, it requires a lot of disciplines. These disciplines are very important. Again, I really appreciate the way Arzish went through products, people, and processes that are taking place in Pakistan at the moment, the changes that are, improvements that we're seeing. I think innovation is the driving force. What Shay mentioned is quite relevant. The policy backdrop has to be flexible and to allow for mobility. What we saw in England after Big Bang in 1985 and in the rest of Europe after financial liberalization in the early 90s is that once you allow for the free movement of people, capital, and ideas, then you are able to proceed to modernize the economy. Thank you both for your contributions.
Yeah, and we like to close this with a question there, Arzish. Like, what's the most common or some of the most common advice you're giving your local community? Because I imagine any way that you communicate with them has kind of been blowing up this last few months, as they look for some guidance.
Oh, so that is a difficult question. So I think my advice has been, and this mostly comes from my experience learning from a lot of these entrepreneurs has been that look at the opportunity side. So where you might imagine, I'm sitting at home, I need to get, like, for example, my furniture delivered, right, to work from home and make this time productive, and you may not find a reliable solution or a website to do so. That is an opportunity for an entrepreneur, right? And everything that every need that we're unable to fulfill during this time is an opportunity for some entrepreneur out there who can go out and do something, right? And the other is that even outside Pakistan, even outside the local market, this quarantine has really opened up the whole world to them. People are now more responsive on digital mediums, on emails, on social media, on ads, right? Because this is the only way that currently most of the world is interacting with the rest of the world, right? So you can build a solution from Pakistan and scale it in Europe or scale it in the US, just sitting from your home. So I think the possibilities are just endless for someone who wants to do something. Right? So that's kind of the advice.
Cool. Well, I guess before we close, Shay had a couple questions. I'll let you chime in here if you just want to go ahead and ask those unmuted.
Thanks, Corey. Thanks, Arzish. Actually, the question that I really want to ask is about so based on my limited experiences, is that one way we can instill investor confidence is when there is a strong foundation of intellectual property laws. How much progress do you think Pakistan has made in that regard?
So over the years, there have been some, good examples where intellectual property laws have been used by people to protect their innovations and creations and everything. But I think in terms of the understanding of intellectual property laws, it has been fairly like very technical and not for the normal person, right? So the laws can be made more flexible and better applicable to all these startups and innovations and everything. And I think there is still a lot of space, especially to work in terms of for the government to improve the intellectual property laws.
Okay, thank you.
Great.
That's
Thank you
good.
so much. Really grateful to have you give us the time and attention and bring this this update from Pakistan, Islamabad, and then your specific community. I like to close usually with this quote. I've loved this last couple of weeks from Soren Brustrom, the director of the Danish Health Authority. He says, "You need to know your epidemic, you need to control it, and you need to be able to have confidence in your data." And that leads into my plea to entrepreneurs to lean into their innate curiosity that they have because they are addicted to entrepreneurism, to help them find the best facts they can to make the best decisions they can for their families, businesses, and teams. And George, I'll let you have the last word, and thanks to Arzish.
Thank you so much.
Arzish, remember that although we are thousands of miles away, we are a resource. If we can contribute with some of our thoughts or recommendations, please feel free to ask us and to call on us. The same way we approach you, we remain accessible at all times. Thank you for your contribution.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for hosting and the amazing questions. It was an honor.